Okay, everybody, we're here for Unit 1, CSS 210. And first off, thank you very much to all who attended our kickoff meeting on campus. I had fun. I hope you had a little bit. I know it was not as exciting as some other classes, I'm sure, but I think it got us off to a good start, and hopefully everybody knows what we're going to do this semester. So we're going to talk about planning, and as I said in the kickoff, this isn't a course really in physical security planning. There just isn't enough time if we really want to talk about the stuff that you need to know, the tools you need. But planning really comes mostly from the risk assessment, the threat assessment, the vulnerability assessment, and those are taught in other classes on campus. So we're just going to quickly go over planning, some of the basic terminology. In our kickoff, we talked about how we're going to define physical security, protecting people, places, information, basically from physical harm. So let's just dive right into planning, see where we want to go with this, and just get some of the basics out of the way so we're talking the same language. So why do we plan at all? I mean, it would be very easy, and I'm at a point in my career where I tried not to do this, but it tends to be something that you start to do after a while. You just walk up to a building and say, okay, I know how to protect this. You do this, do that, and then you get in your car and you drive away, and most of the time you get it right after a while. But if you take a real physical security plan and actually write it out, it keeps you focused, it keeps you organized, and it makes sure you hit all the steps in a process. If you try to do it the way that I described, with knowing that you know everything and going in and doing it that way, you might be successful, but you might forget one or two things. So if you don't do it with a process, you really are taking a big chance, and that is the one vulnerability that's going to come back to haunt you. It always is. So just think of it this way: if you ever wanted to go someplace, you wouldn't just hop on any bus, buy a ticket, and sit down and say, I hope I get where I want to go. Not a chance in the world that that's ever going to happen. So you really do have to have some sort of a plan, and a written plan is the best way to go when it comes to physical security. So to get to the physical security plan, on the bottom in the red here, you need a risk assessment, a threat assessment, and a vulnerability assessment. Now for this course, there's a risk assessment course, there are threat courses that you'll take. We will provide those. I will provide those to you. I will tell you what the risks are, the threats are, the vulnerabilities are for a particular facility, site, location, whatever we want to call it. And you are in turn going to learn how to protect against those by making out a plan and putting the right tools in place. Again, other classes will teach you don't need to know how to write a risk assessment yet. You simply need to know how to read one, and they're very easy. They're going to tell you what you could lose if something goes wrong. That's your risk assessment. Your threat assessment is going to tell you all the people, things that may do you harm, be they natural disasters or an armed adversary, right? Anything that could do you harm is a threat. The vulnerabilities are the gaps you have between what's at stake, what's at risk, the threats that may come and make that risk actually happen, and the things that you have in place that aren't going to help you very much. Those are the vulnerabilities, and your physical security plan closes up the vulnerabilities. So the physical security plan is a map how you're going to match your risks, threats, and vulnerabilities to actions, or as we call them, mitigations, to try to close the gaps, to make things more secure. You write them out, you list each major risk, threat, and vulnerability, and then your physical security plan is that paragraph or a few sentences you add describing exactly how you're going to address that. So every one of your risk assessment plans that you will get, threat assessment plans, vulnerability assessments, will list things that can harm you and how they can harm you and what harm could happen. And from that, you then come up with how you're going to make that go away or at least lessen it. Most of the time you can't make it go away. Sometimes you can, but in most cases, you're going to lessen that. Okay? One of the reasons you write out these plans too is because it helps you get the budget you need to make it happen. If you walk into a manager's office, a vice president's office, a facility engineer's office and say, I need $100,000 tomorrow to better protect Building 3 on our campus here, he's going to say, okay, what do you need it for? And if you just say, well, I want to put up some card readers, I want to put up some cameras, I think we need better locks on the doors, I think we need better lighting, the first question you're going to hear is, well, why? If you have a written physical security plan that tells you what you're addressing and this is how you're going to address it, it lays out for that person who's going to release funding to you what it is you're concerned about, what it is that might harm you, what it is that's sitting there now that keeps you from being properly protected, and what you're going to do about it. That plan really helps you. So one of the ways you can do that is to do a drawing first, is actually take a drawing of a building that you're going to protect. And we're going to mostly talk about protection of buildings, facilities. People are contained in there, so we're going to protect the people. Your resources are contained in there, so we're going to protect the resources. But if we protect the physical building or facility, that's one way to address it, right? So if we take the drawing and then go backwards into a written description, we can then come up with our written physical security plan from a drawing we did. Before we get into an example of a site security plan, or at least a portion of a site security plan, how we address things one at a time, in the book, the authors they're the never camp. They say never sacrifice security for convenience. And I understand what they're trying to say, and that is that, you can't let somebody get hurt because something was easier for them to do, right? But there's also some responsible risk taking that you can consider. And so, when we talk about the example that I'm going to show you, and it's an HR records room that we're going to address. There's a vulnerability there. I talk about how to make it a little easier to get in when people are working, when we know there are people there already in the area looking at the room. And I'll tell you why when we go through the example, but the key is to make sure that if you have something for convenience that you put in there, you put it in there right in the site security plan and mention it so that everybody understands that, yes, we're going to make it a little bit less secure for a convenience factor, but the whole idea is that if we make it too secure, no one will obey the security rules. And I'll show you that here in a second. So here I took little sections of risk, threat, vulnerability assessments, right? So you have these 3 reports, and each one of them, so the risk is the facility will contain employee records with personally identifiable information, PII it's referred to, in room 212. So there's a HR department, it's a big company, and they have all of the HR records. So they have your application and mine when we applied to the company, they have our pay records, they have all of our disciplinaries, everything in our files, right? Our employee file for HR. And if I had that file for you, I would know your name, I would know your social security number, your past addresses. Heck, I may even understand your mother's maiden name because it may be somewhere in the application or in a background check that was done in that file. With that information, I could easily steal someone's identity. So there's a legal requirement to protect. The threat is that if PII is compromised, identity theft could happen. And since the company was legally responsible for protecting that information, the company would have some liability, and an employee could easily sue the company for not protecting their personal information. There are legal requirements to do that. So the risk is that there is personally identifiable information in a room. The threat is that it could be compromised by an identity thief, and then, in turn, the company would have liability. The vulnerability is the room needs to be accessed regularly by human resources personnel. It's not that we can just lock these things in a vault and, as I think I said in the entry, it's easy to protect something if you just, put a brick wall around it, cover it with ground glass, and light the brick wall on fire with no entries in it. You're pretty good. Nobody's going to get up and over, right? But people have to go in and out. So the vulnerability really is that people are going to be accessing this on a regular basis as part of their job. So we have a risk, we have a threat, and we have a vulnerability. So my proposed physical security measure, my physical security plan for that room, I would put access card readers with a secondary authentication, a numerical keypad. So you would run your card as you do on your dorm room and other places on campus, right? Swipe it or hold it up for a proximity card. We'll go into the different types, but you would use a card, your ID card, to get in. Then you would also have to put in a unique numerical keypad that's tied to that card. And we would put that on the entry doors to room 212. But in order to allow for convenient entry during normal working hours, only the card is required for entry during normal business hours. During hours when HR people are not generally present, both the card and the keypad will be required. All entry doors will be alarmed if entry is attempted or a breach occurs. So if somebody comes in and tries to run a card that doesn't work on the room, they're not authorized to be in there. An alarm will be sent somewhere. If they try to use a crowbar instead of a card to get in, or if they use the wrong numerical keypad when that's supposed to be there, they would send in an alarm, and we would have a response from either police or security or whomever is tasked with responding to alarms. But what we did was we took a risk and we identified the threat. We took that from the threat analysis. We know that that's a threat. The vulnerability we know because people are going to be going in and out of the room, so we can't just lock up these records. That's a vulnerability. So this is how we propose to do it, and we put a convenience factor on this one so I could show you how that works. And again, the book says never sacrifice security for convenience. I simply disagree. I don't want to make things too easy. I'm not going to sacrifice all the security for convenience. I'm not going to say just leave the door open because it's easier. But if during the day people are moving boxes of records in and out of this room, now picture that. You've got a box of records in your hand and you walk up and you have a card reader that's a proximity card reader, meaning you just have to hold your card up to it. You don't have to swipe it. Now if I have it on a lanyard around my neck, I can just walk up and kind of bend around and get close enough with my card and the door will click and I will be able to get inside. And that's a legal entry. But if I also had to use the keypad during the day when I'm carrying boxes of records, then I have to put the box down somewhere, get this all done, pick the box back up. Eventually people will do one thing. They will prop that door open. They will get a door stop, or they will get duct tape and put it around the door strike so that the door doesn't ever really lock. The bolt never goes over into the door. They will do anything to not have to use those two authentication devices when it's the busiest times and their hands are full. So if we know that's during the normal working day, then the smart thing for us to do is to concede that we either give up all security because we know it will be compromised because people are looking for convenience on their own, or we make a small concession and say, okay, we'll keep the door closed just with the one authentication, just with the card for the day, so that you can get in, you'll be able to kind of bend around, and if you put we'll give you badge holders that go on your arm if you want, and you can just walk up and kind of throw your arm up against the reader and the door will open, and you won't have to use a keypad except after hours. That type of convenience may be very helpful. So here's an example of a section of a physical security plan. And again, I want you to understand how these work, but we're not going to write a physical security plan. I'm going to provide you with one, and you from there are going to provide me the mitigations in this course. But you will get something like this on the building you're going to design for me later in the semester. You will get several of these. This is the risk in the building, this is the threat, this is the vulnerability, and you'll be filling in that bottom part inside of a budget and a particular set of devices that you'll be allowed to use. So if you don't understand this example, I want you to shoot me a note, and I will send you some more examples that you can look at. I'll write up a few more. It's not hard to do, but this is pretty much where your information comes from, and you propose the physical security measures. If you had this example and you went to somebody for funding, my guess is that they would understand what you're trying to do. They would probably approve it, and you would get money to put card readers on the doors to room 212, along with numerical keypads for the off hours, and you'd have no trouble getting that funded because you've shown what's going on, you've shown what your vulnerabilities are, and you've shown a way how you're going to close them. Another important caveat, something that you may have noticed, is I needed to know what type of function was happening in room 212. Right? I needed to know what the room looked like. I needed to know there were doors on the room. I reviewed the risk and threat and vulnerability assessments, and I would need to review the building plans or actually be on the ground and look at this room. So what if room 212 was it was numbered 212, but it's open. It has no doors. You walk in through an archway and you're in an area where they store records in file cabinets, and the file cabinets are all lined up against the walls, and it's really in a hallway. It's really not a closed, room with doors and locks and everything else on it. You'd have to consider, well, do we install doors, which is probably the right way, but could you do it with fire code and other things? Or do we use different type of file cabinets? Do we alarm the file cabinets themselves so we know when somebody goes in them? And you can put actually alarms on file cabinet doors. Use fireproof, heavy-duty file cabinets. Do we put all the records into a vault and we, open up the vault only certain times and pull records out and put those into the file cabinets for daily use? A lot of different things you can do. But I would need to know what room 212 is going to look like. How many doors does it have? Are they all lockable doors at all? Again, so don't try to do a physical security plan without either having a picture, a floor plan of what you're looking at, so you know that there are doors there, you know how many there are and that type of thing, or actually going to the site that you're going to secure and putting your eyes and your boots on the ground, as they say, and putting eyes on it so you understand how it looks. If you don't do that, you may offer up a mitigation that sounds really good, but when someone goes to install it, they say, wait a minute, we can't install card readers on doors because there are no doors. It's a big open area, and it's just labeled room 212. So you have to have a little bit of background on it and make sure you're checking floor plans and or pictures and or being right there on the ground to look at the building when you design physical security. In your reading this week, there was a short blurb on CPTED. There's another section on CPTED, I believe, in page around 78, 79 for a few more pages, and feel free to read that if you're not familiar with it. It's crime prevention through environmental design, and realistically, that's fancy talk for designing a building and grounds that are less likely to be attractive to and attract crime for the protection of people and resources. So we'll go into it a little more when we talk about perimeter protection, but CPTED is it's a big buzzword in the physical security world. Everybody says, you design with CPTED, and that's great. But I will tell you that I have never met a physical security professional who ever got in on the ground floor of the design of a building. They were shown, rough drawings of what a building was going to look like. An architect designs a building for a commercial operation, for a business or for the government, and then the security guys get to take a look at it and try to figure out what really is wrong. And you may be able to make some minor modifications. But CPTED is normally something that you're not going to get involved in for the interior of the building because you're just not going to get that opportunity. Structural walls need to go where they need to go. Okay? Offices are going to go where people have already designed them to be. If the building design is for 500 people and somebody wants a huge auditorium and they want that auditorium to be glass so that everybody can see to the outside, that's going to be designed in that building, and you're never going to get anybody to change that for security reasons. So I want you to think about CPTED. As much as I really would hope that you could get in on the ground floor of designing a building someday, and if you do, that would be really cool, because you could design a really cool building with security features already built into the building itself, right? But think of it as an exterior tool, things you can do on the grounds and around the perimeter, because that's really where you're going to have to concentrate your CPTED. And again, if you're not familiar with CPTED, go to page 79 in the textbook, and there's about 4 or 5 pages on it there. It will give you a good idea of what it is and what it does. But again, I think the whole idea that you're going to design the building with security in mind is not realistic, and I'll show you an example of that. So think about some common building and grounds features that you see in buildings all over the place. You go into big cities, and actually California seems very big on this, and I've seen it a lot in Puerto Rico as well, and it could be because of the cost of land to put parking structures. But under-building parking areas are very common in apartment buildings, in commercial buildings, in hotels. Underground parking, you pull in, you go down into essentially the basement underneath a building, you park underneath, you go through a door, usually with a card, to go upstairs and get on an elevator and go up to your office. Full glass front buildings, executive offices in the front, very common, especially good places like New York City. You'll see buildings that the whole front is glass. I mean, they're just design feature. Glass is a big design feature. People like it. It's aesthetically pleasing. So you'll see full glass front buildings with executive offices normally in the front, where the best views are, right, out onto the street. Even when you go places that are not in big cities, right, where you don't have underground parking perhaps or full glass front buildings, parking is something that a building owner normally wants to be very convenient for visitors, especially. And so parking goes right up to the edge of a building or very close. You don't want people to walk so far to get into your place of business, whether it be a commercial, retail, or any other business. Parking is something that you'd really try to get to the edge of your building as close as you can for the convenience of your customers. Now, it's a security nightmare, and we'll see that in a minute, but it is something that's done, and it's a common feature. Flower beds along walkways and driveways. They look pretty, and when you have a nice commercial building, you want flower beds. They're planted in the springtime, and they go along all the sidewalks and walkways. Just like open courtyards and quads between buildings. If you have several buildings, there's usually an open courtyard that has some sort of a park-like feature, right? Benches and walkways. Heck, if you think about on SRU campus, you leave spots and you walk over to try to go to the dining hall. You walk through that quad there. It's a 5-point or so sidewalk there in the middle, kind of an open courtyard. Large opening grand entryways, great for for making a grand entrance. They're wide open normally, and then long straight driveways. When you have buildings that are that set off from the roadway, even there's usually a nice long straight drive-in, pretty fence if you're going to have one, but it's a nice long straight drive-in to get to the parking area that's right near the building. Those are common building features, and I'm sure if you drove around and looked at buildings, you'd see the parking is right next to the edge of the building. A lot of buildings are made out of glass. If you're in a city, in Pittsburgh, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of underground parking underneath the buildings. It's just so common that you see those features. But couldn't physical security be improved if the parking areas were a short distance from the buildings? Instead of being underneath them, wouldn't it be better from a physical security standpoint that people I don't know aren't driving underneath my building? Executive offices, do they need to be on the corner in the front? Could they not be on the corner in the back of the facility where no one would be able to see them from the street? Could you not put them interior to the facility where they would be much more secure and harder to get to? Parking right up to a building. I have visitors who I have not screened yet, who I don't know, and they come in and they park right next to my building. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with that if that visitor wants to do me harm. How about instead of those flower beds along the sidewalk, we use 3-foot hedges, and inside we put cement bollards. And a bollard is one of those tube-like things that stick up out of the ground. You see them around parking garages sometimes. You see them on city streets sometimes. It's one of those things that if you run into it, you're going to damage your car rather than go any farther. That's a bollard, right? If you had cement bollards in the middle of hedges along those walkways, they'd look just as nice. I'm sure that actually look a little more regal, and you wouldn't see the bollard if it was painted the same color as the hedges inside, but you'd have better protection, even from a safety standpoint, of people on the sidewalk. Same thing, you can use bollards that are actually removable. They screw into the ground, or they have a key lock on them that you can take them in and out. What if we closed off those courtyards to vehicular traffic? Would we be much more secure, much safer? But we don't do that. Those grand entryways, put some big heavy planters out in front of them, right? You got more flowers. If you want flowers, you've got flowers. Big heavy planters out in the front so no one can run their car right through the front. If you go onto YouTube right now, I mean, you can see quite a few videos of people driving cars through the front doors of all kinds of businesses. And I'm not quite sure why businesses don't have protections to make sure that doesn't happen. And then curvy driveways. You have a long straight driveway leading up to a business or a building. What you have is a ramp to build up speed to do just as I said, drive through the front door. If it's curvy, if you have to go around curves, if you have speed bumps, which nobody likes, but there's a reason for them, you can keep speed from being built up. And from a security standpoint, all of these design features, all of these things are ways that you slow things down a little bit, that you get a little bit better control on who's vulnerable. So, from a CPTED, these are CPTED type things. Changing some of the exterior features so that you have better chance of controlling crime and securing your facility. So here's a great example of underground parking. This is the World Trade Center in 1993. We all know about the bombings at the World Trade Center, the aircraft crashing into the buildings in 2001. But in 1993, the underground parking was bombed. Terrorists with a Ford Econoline van rented from Ryder put a 1,200-pound bomb in the vehicle, drove unobstructed underneath the building, and lit 20 feet fuses and ran and blew up the base of the building. Building was constructed strong enough to withstand the blast, and there were some injuries, obviously, and I believe there were some fatalities. I can't say that I remember. I apologize. I'll look it up and get back with you on it. But nonetheless, they drove unobstructed a vehicle underneath the building. Now, I would think that the building probably should have been better protected. There should have been some controls. I mean, there could have been card access gates to let you underneath the building if you work there and you park someplace else if you don't. There could have been a weight sensor that said a Ford Econoline van weighed about 5,000 pounds, a 1,200 pound bomb in it. 2 people. Now we're up to 6,000 pounds, 7,000 pounds here. The heaviest vehicle curb weight that you normally drive for for a passenger vehicle, and it's not even really used for that, is the F450 Ford pickup. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's a huge pickup, normally used for commercial purposes, and its curb weight is about 7,100, 7,200 pounds in its stripped down version. But could you not have had a weight sensor that said if the vehicle, any vehicle is over 6,000 pounds, it needs to be diverted and checked, or it needs to be go a different route and park above ground away from the building? But that didn't happen. So, some of these SEPTED features, this is one that you weren't going to change. The buildings were designed by an architect to have underground parking, and the security director at the World Trade Center had absolutely no say in the matter that was going to change. I am sure that that was called to a lot of people's attention, but they basically said, no, this is where we want the parking to be. And so when you talk about SEPTED, again, think about those exterior features we talked about, how you could change some of those things. But some of these built-in features, they are what they are, and that's why we use physical security mitigations to protect things like a weight sensor or cart access, or blocking people from that are not employees from getting in at all would have been the way to go. Ironically, you'd think that the building codes and the people who build buildings would be more concerned about the physical security of the building. And I'm sure they are, but this is from the National Institutes of Building Sciences concerning underground parking. And I'll let you read the whole thing, but essentially what it says is there are certain features, excuse me, and measures that should be incorporated into typical basement parking spaces to ensure the security of visitors. Everything they have here, CCTV, lighting, card reader access control for vehicle entrance doors, concrete-filled protective bollards, protect vehicle entry keypads, those kinds of things, really are concerned about the people who are visitors underneath your building. There is nothing here in this design that tells me they are concerned about a blast coming from the building going upwards. Nothing in their design manual that I could find suggested that they should be concerned about a blast inside the underground parking structure. It's just not what building people do. It's not what architects do. They make the building strong enough to support itself, obviously, and to last for 100 years that way. But they don't consider things like blasts. And still today, even in the age of terrorism, they don't, in most cases, consider the types of things that you must consider for the safety of people in the building itself. They really concern themselves. So what did they forget? They forgot about the people in the building up above that parking structure, really. They more concern themselves with the visitors themselves, how they get into the building, how they get out of the parking structure, and whether they're safe in that basement parking structure. But not so much for those of us who live above the basement. So really don't expect building codes and designers to think for you and to build in those physical security kinds of details. Again, SEPTED would do that, but you have to be consulted on SEPTED and be in on the ground floor. But I just want to give you this example. So just to solidify the fact that you probably cannot build a building with a lot of physical security features already built into its design to make it easier to protect and to protect people. You're going to have to go after the fact and retrofit your mitigations into the building itself. One of the last things I wanted to go over this week with you is the whole depth and defense. And depth and defense is really based on four things. The book calls it respond. That last one, I call it defend. Deter, delay, detect, and defend. Okay? And if you have a physical security mitigation that you are going to recommend, you should incorporate as many of those four elements into your physical plan as possible. So you want to deter someone from doing something. You make that target less attractive. So we'll use an example here of the bank in a minute, but you're making the target less attractive. You're going to delay them. You're going to have certain barriers and things to slow them down in their attack on you. You're going to detect that attack through alarms, cameras, and other features. And then you're going to have a responding force, a way the police come in, some way that you're going to defend yourself when you get to that last. When you didn't deter them, you've already delayed them. Now you've detected that they're going to go through with the act. You have to have some sort of response or defense, which is normally a responding security force or a police intervention. So putting defense, depth and defense into an example, a bank branch is always an easy one to do, okay? You're going to deter the theft. You don't have cash laying out all over the place. I know that the teller has a cash drawer, and I know most people don't go to banks anymore. Bank branches are closing, but when you go to the bank branch, the teller will open up the drawer and count out some cash, but there's not really tons of cash laying around. It's not like they have this big box of money that sits out. It's not really openly displayed, and you really don't know how much that person has in that drawer. But they seem to take in a lot of money. I mean, banks are where the money is, as Dillinger said when he was asked why he robs banks, because that's where the money is. We know that's where the money is. But there's not a lot of money that you see. There may be guards in place, especially in inner city banks still have bank guards, and there's usually visible cameras. There's also covert cameras in every bank that you don't see. Those who tell you that you can just go in and shoot the camera or knock it down and then rob the bank aren't thinking straight, because there are more cameras that you can't see than the ones you can. Okay, but then there's the delay factor. The counters are hardened. There's a banking security code that says that down below the counter there is steel plate in those counters at the bank, so the teller could get down underneath it, and if there's any kind of a blockade, if you will, if there's a bulletproof glass or wiring or some kind of caging, any kind of feature that keeps you from jumping over that counter, that teller is safe underneath that counter unless you can reach around and get to them. So the counters are hardened and the vaults are locked. That's a delay. The money, normally, if there's money stored or important documents or anything that someone would want to get to in a vault, and the vaults are locked, right? If the vault itself is not locked, it has a day gate which is locked, which is a secondary door on a vault that is interior to that big heavy metal one, or individual boxes in the vault are locked in and of themselves. So locks are a delay factor in a bank for sure. There are duress alarms to detect. The little footpad and the button underneath the counter. The managers have them all in their offices. They're all over the bank. And some banks use portable duresses. So even if that guard is out in the open on his belt, he may have a portable duress. Even to the point where if the guard is in an inner city, sometimes they're carrying a portable duress that it's got a mercury switch in it. If you go prone, if you get knocked down, if someone says get on the floor, once you get on the floor, that goes prone, it sends in an alarm. Banks use dye packs, right? So that when you open the bank bag, you get blue dye or pink dye all over you. They have networked video so they can detect from afar. It's not just video that's going to a recorder in that bank, but it's networked, and someone in a bank control center somewhere a distance away sees an alarm, turns on the cameras, looks, sees what's going on, and then they call the police along with a direct notification to the police, normally from that duress alarm. So the bank has deter, delay, detect, and defend, all built into their physical security plan when a bank robbery may occur. And you can see how each one of those, without the others, could be a problem. If you could deter them, right, and they decided not to do it, that's great. But if you don't deter them, and you don't delay them, and you don't detect, and you don't have a defense, even if you did the first three, if you don't have a way to say, come get me and come help me, the defend part, it's not going to work very well. So you really do need all four of those depth and defense elements to make sure that your physical security is a full protection kind of a plan. So deter, delay, detect, and defend. If you use respond, that's okay. The book used it. I just think the D's are easy to remember. You will see those again. You will see those again a lot over the course of this course. So make sure you know those. You will certainly see them on the quiz this week. I'll tell you that. So we're 34 minutes in, and we're going to wrap it up. I think that this is enough for the basics to get us started, and that with the reading. And please ensure you've done the reading, because it's something that you're going to see again. I think you just need to understand physical security has to be planned. You won't get there if you don't have a plan, and the plan is based on that risk, threat, and vulnerability assessment, and then you adding in the physical security fix that you're going to use, the tool that you're going to use, and why you think it would be effective, and how you're going to implement it. Okay? The idea that convenience is a bad thing, I think I want to make sure that you understand that you don't compromise security just nilly-willy. You just don't let people do what they want, especially if what they want could hurt them in the long run. But understand that a good security manager, a really good, successful security manager, will consider conveniences when possible, especially when that giving up that convenience, when making that concession, will make people more compliant with the basic security that you need. If you put too much security on something, then people are just going to find a way to block the door open, to shut the alarm off. I've seen sounder alarms on walls that have foam rubber stuffed in them and tape over top of them so no one can hear them. I have seen card readers where someone has taken it off. The old style card readers, you could take them off and you could cross the wires. It was like hot wire in a car and the door would just stay open. Eventually it burns out the solenoid in the door, but it was done. A lot of tape over locks, those things, and that's a convenience item. Most of the time, you just need to find the person who did it and you need to take action, but you have to also consider why they did it. Why is this so hard? And don't be afraid to give some convenience concessions if you think it's going to help you overall with compliance. In order to choose the right physical security mitigations, you need to visit the place that you're going to protect, or at least have good site plans. Don't try to do it with just the risk, threat, and vulnerability assessments. Those are the tools you're going to use to get started, but you really need to lay eyes on it so that you know that when you say, let's put card readers on doors, that the doors actually exist. So that when you say we're going to put locks on all the doors so no one can get in, you also understand whether or not there are windows that might open. Most buildings don't have windows that open anymore because of the onset of air conditioning and everything and trying to keep energy consumption down. But still, I can't tell you how many places I've been. A great example is where people have put locks on card readers and heavy-duty enforcement on doors going into a room that had a priority resource in it. And I went to the room next door, popped the ceiling tile, crawled over, and went down through the ceiling tile because it was a false ceiling. They didn't know it was a false ceiling because they never visited. So always visit if you can, or at least understand what the full perimeter looks like with a good site plan. CPTED we talked about. It's really great. It is a fantastic tool if you can get in and design a building with physical security in it. I just don't think you're going to get that opportunity much, so that I would concentrate with CPTED as an external tool, external to the building. Work on the grounds through CPTED. That's really where you're going to cut down on a lot of the crime and where you can have some real impact using those types of physical security tools that are just intuitive to you, right? Putting up estate fencing that looks nice but has points on the top. That's a CPTED tool because when you try to climb over it, it hurts. Okay, and they make really nice estate fencing rather than chain link with razor wire. They make really nice estate fencing, as it's called, with black wrought iron look to it and little points on the top. And if you put your hand on that point, it's going to go through your hand. There you can have an impact, not so much in the actual design of the building. And understand that the building code people and the people who are building the building, they just don't have standards that are security focused. So any physical security you're going to do on a project, get it in your head now that you're probably going to have to go in and retrofit things in and put them in as after the fact kind of things, because there are very few natural features built into buildings even today for physical security. And finally, understand depth and defense, because we're going to make sure that when you apply something, when you apply mitigation, I'm going to want to see how you went through and used mitigations to deter, delay, detect, and defend the building. You're going to find a way to make the target less attractive. Putting up cameras makes something less attractive. Someone turning on bright lights in a parking lot at night makes it less attractive to go and steal cars there because you could be seen, right? That's a deterrent. The delay may be that there's only one exit from that parking lot at night, and it has an arm on it that slows you down, and it takes your picture on the way out. Now you've got detection and delay, right? It's going to slow you down. You can only get out one way because there's trees all around the parking lot, and you only have one exit. And you get there, and there's a gate there, and you have to put in a code, or you have to do something. Even if you just drive up, it slows you down. Stops for a few minutes, takes a picture of the car and the license plate. You've been detected now. And then if the person just zips on through and busts through that parking lot, let's say, and busts that guard arm, that wooden arm that drops down, you have to have a plan to respond. When you see that, it should cause an alarm. And do you call the police right away? Do you send security? Do you have another gate on an entry road that you can close to box them in? A way to defend. So understand depth and defense. When you have a mitigation for physical security, we'll be looking at that. If you had trouble with anything we've discussed this week, if it isn't clear to you, certainly reach out to me, but don't fret about it. All of these things will be reinforced. These basics are going to come up in conversation, and there'll be more examples. And when examples come up over the course of the semester, I'll say, remember when in the beginning when we talked about depth and defense? this is a great example of, how all 4 elements are hit when we decided how we were going to physically secure something. So don't fret about anything. If you have real confusion, let me know. I'll be glad to work with you one-on-one or in groups, or we can have a group phone call. It doesn't matter. But don't fret about it. Just kind of go over these things. Don't forget that this week you have reading, which you should have done already, hopefully, because it would have made the lecture make a lot more sense. You had this lecture, which you've completed. Thank you very much. 40 minutes and 29 seconds so far, a little bit longer than I normally go, quite frankly. Apologize. And then you have a quiz, and it's going to be a short quiz. It's not going to be too difficult. It's going to be on this lecture and on the reading. Everything that you will find on the quiz is available in one of those 2 places. Everything is due on Sunday at 11:30 p.m. 11:30 because that is what D2L allows me to set it at. So if you are going to be late beyond Sunday at 11:30, you probably should not wait till 11:29 on Sunday to tell me that, because I will be long asleep for one thing, and also bad news is not fine wine. It doesn't get better with age. If you're not going to make your deadlines, I need to know that as soon as possible. So again, everything is due on Sunday this week. And if you have questions on the lecture or the reading, please let me know. And with that, have a great week, and we will talk again during the week, I'm sure, back and forth. I'll be posting a discussion board that just be open for discussions. Also, do yourself a favor, subscribe to the news on the course. There's a way to subscribe to that so it pops up on your devices when I post news articles, because that is where I'll put new stuff that may be happening, or hints, or reminders of things. So subscribe to that. It's a pretty good thing to do. Have a great week, everybody.